Okay, so here is our last and final video of the civil rights. And once again, a reminder, the essential question is what were the goals and tactics of different civil rights leaders? So essentially today we're going to be talking about Malcolm X and the idea of black power, a very different tactic to gain civil rights in America in the 60s. So a little background, Malcolm X was once Malcolm Little, and he was the son of a Baptist preacher who argued and urged blacks to stand up for their rights. However, his father was killed by white supremacists in 1931, so we can see that's a pretty early time, way before the Civil Rights Movement. And Nebraska was a mixed as far as its reputation in race in America. And after that, Malcolm becomes pretty anger-filled and bitter, and he moves to Harlem, where he becomes involved in illicit activities such as gambling and drug dealing and robbery. And he was eventually arrested at age 20 for armed robbery. And it wasn't until jail where he began to look at the teachings of Elijah Muhammad. And that's the guy we're going to talk about next. So there he is, Malcolm X. All right, so Elijah Muhammad, the guy that Malcolm X began to investigate, was a leader of a black and religious group. So this is not, unlike Martin Luther King, this is probably a combination of African American civil rights and Islamic faith. And so his teachings were perceived to really represent a complete separation from whites in society. So he'd be advocating for a black segregation, dividing up of people by race. And really he expressed this, that the first people to rule the world were blacks, and that whites tricked them out of power and then began to oppress them. Malcolm X, as a young guy, really began to develop his speaking skills and his political ideas under the direction of Elijah Muhammad. And what was formed was the Nation of Islam, or the NOI. It was an activist group, mostly believed that African slaves were previously Muslim. And if so, then Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam wanted to reconvert blacks to Islam because of this was part of the heritage that was stolen from them, and they wanted to create a black nation within the United States. Once again, kind of a migratory or forced or segregation by blacks in society. And he gains the X in his name because he rejected his last name as a slave name. And so Malcolm X really was popularized because of his constant accusations of racism, and he demanded violent action of self-defense. That if so, he would counter Martin Luther King's position pretty strongly and say that that blacks were not supposed to be non-violent and practice civil disobedience, but they were supposed to defend themselves even if violently. And so he contrasted and told the injustices of his people from the past over and over again, and really gains a large audience and following by African Americans. But whites look on and are rather fearful of Malcolm X's speeches and the information he's spreading. So he gathered, like I said, lots of admiration, but white folks were a little fearful of his preaching. So here are some of his famous sayings. You can read them here. So if you want to hit pause, now would be a good time. So as you can see in 1965, these are some pretty stark words he had to say in relation to the Civil Rights Movement. And he becomes a pretty strong advocate for direct action. And by the start of the 60s, there was tension growing, though, in the Nation of Islam. Malcolm X exposed rumors that this Elijah Muhammad guy had affairs, which is a big no-no in Islam. and he believed that Elijah Muhammad was jealous of his increasing popularity, and the Nation of Islam blamed Malcolm X for his controversial remarks, specifically regarding JFK. And really what that comes from is after the assassination, Malcolm basically claimed that the violence Kennedy failed to prevent ended up claiming his life, so an eye for an eye sort of an idea. And these two famous quotes, the chickens coming home to roost, chickens coming home to roost never made me sad, it only made me glad. People really took this and were really upset with his words. Civil rights advocates, people all across the country, really, he was stirring up the pot with these words. And in '64, he makes a pilgrimage to Mecca, which is part of a Muslim's faith, and discovers that really Muslims are people of all races. And so with his new knowledge, and he doesn't really trust the Nation of Islam anymore, he argues that maybe not all whites are the devil, which seems like a good idea. And Malcolm X never really abandons his theory that racism has destroyed the nation and blacks could really be the only ones to free themselves, but no longer is he claiming that whites are the devil. However, tragically, another assassination. In '65, Malcolm X is assassinated, what some believe by the Nation of Islam, by a black Muslim in New York City during a rally. So other quotes from Malcolm X about Martin Luther King. If you want to pause here and read these, once again, some pretty stark words against a man who many Americans would consider a hero. So go ahead and pause it and read it. All right, so he was really, this last one, King wants the same thing I want, freedom, but really their methods are very different on how they think the path to get there. So black power is another term we need to know, and black power emphasizes racial pride and the desire for African Americans to achieve equality. So really this is a creation between black political and social institutions and was popularized by this guy, Stokely Carmichael, and many student nonviolent coordinating committee members were becoming pretty critical of this nonviolent response, especially as they're getting beat and hosed and harmed by citizens as well as police in their protests throughout the country, but in particular the South. Black power became a pretty convincing and strong appeal for a lot of African Americans. Famously, in the '68 Olympics, these two guys, Tommy Smith and John Carlos, give the black power symbol, which is the fist, the black hand. They wore a glove, and for their actions, they were suspended and actually banned from the Olympic Village. And really, this is a snapshot of black power in action. And it becomes an organization, the Black Panther Party, was founded as a militant group in '66 in Oakland by Huey Newton and Bobby Seeley, and they believed violent revolution was the only way to free themselves, and that means get some guns. And so we can see the Black Panther Party was pretty strong in its advocacy for self-protection, and they get into plenty of violence, as you might imagine, as people get guns, and they are involved with confrontations with the police, and people die on both sides. And one of the leaders, Newton, gets tried for killing a police officer, and Seeley is a member of what's called the Chicago Eight, and basically they tried to disrupt the Democratic Convention in '68, which we'll talk a little bit more about when we talk about hippies, but a really tumultuous and crazy time for the election of the president, or before the president. All right, so here are some landmark legislation during the civil rights. So kind of a side note from Black Power, but the Brown versus Board of Education ends segregation. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 gives blacks civil rights, again, that they really deserved, but the power that the federal government was going to use to intervene on their behalf for protection of those rights, including the Voting Rights Acts, which followed up in the next year, and then further civil rights acts in '68, all during the Johnson administration, to try to provide protection and so both civil liberties and civil rights, if you remember that from the first video, for African Americans, and ideas like affirmative action, making it mandatory to have a certain number of minorities in institutions like schools or businesses, desegregation, and the 24th Amendment all really exist to further civil rights. And the Civil Rights Campaign really takes a turn as it focuses not only on race, but also on poor people, which is kind of a universal thing, not just a black thing. And so the second phase of the Civil Rights would really address economic inequalities in the United States. This was seen as a step up from just political to now economic. So now we're talking about people's money, and people are going to not back this as strongly as they did simply fights for political equality. And so they focused on three areas: economic justice, housing for the poor, and an economic Bill of Rights similar to the Bill of Rights we have in our Constitution. And really it lacks momentum because Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert Kennedy, who both MLK supported it much stronger than Robert Kennedy, but nevertheless, they're trying to wipe out poverty. But his assassination really is the nail in the coffin for that movement. And that happens when he goes to Memphis, Tennessee to support striking garbage workers. As strange as it sounds, it was an important moment at the time. And at 6 o'clock, after a lot of sessions in his hotel room, he walks out and is hit by a bullet at the Lorraine Hotel. And it is discovered that James Earl Ray was tried and found guilty of killing Martin Luther King Jr. in '68, and Ray dies in 1998 in jail. So here's a famous picture of some of his assistants. There's King down on the ground, pointing off to the direction of the bullet. And this is most recently the new memorial in Washington, D.C. on the Mall, the only non-president to be on there, which is a high honor. People have mixed emotions, I guess, or mixed opinions about the art of the sculpture, but nevertheless a testament to his importance to our nation. And really the conclusion is the Civil Rights movement had many different and unique leaders that came to power. So some preached violence, some preached peace, and some protested. Really, however, everybody had something in common. They wanted freedom and they wanted equality for their race. Today, we look back on this with great pride, or we should as Americans, in the acts of that really furthered our nation and create the conditions we really take for granted today. However, not everything is complete. Obviously, we still have a long way to go between that speech we heard from King. However, I would say in my generation certainly has enjoyed a lot of these benefits. And this kind of becomes, in part, the anthem for the Civil Rights Movement. Amazing Grace, a pretty famous American song. So if you want to read the lyrics, you can probably hear the song in your head. And really quick, a review of our ideas is Malcolm X in his ideas of violence, if necessary, and segregation, who he got those from this guy, Elijah Muhammad, who really put forward the Nation of Islam and a combination of political action and Islamic faith, and Black Power by Tony Smith and John Carlos, as well as Stokely Carmichael advocated really valuing their race, and also the idea that they should get political rights. The Black Panther Party furthers that by use of violence, armed violence that is, and civil rights legislation gets passed, really important stuff here in the 60s, and the civil rights movement changes into the Poor People's Campaign towards the end. However, it begins to fade and lose steam, one, because people are less enthusiastic about economic equality than maybe racial, and also the death of Martin Luther King really leaves a huge leadership gap, as well as a face that the nation is familiar with. So hopefully you learned some stuff. We're going to talk all about this in class. This is good stuff. So I'll see you guys in class.